Congressman Biggs, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be with you.
So Democrats are basically saying that the data doesn't support reopening the economy. Republicans, of course, for the most part, are saying, yeah, it does. Tell us the argument.
The argument is pretty clear. You look at the science and the data, what you're going to find is we know who the most vulnerable are. We can isolate, we can help, we can protect that group. But on the other hand, if you keep the economy closed, what you're seeing is folks who have public health issues. You're going to create a public health crisis. You're going to have people who aren't getting the treatments they need for their diseases. They were kept out of hospitals because we were trying to prepare for a surge that didn't come. So you have a public health crisis. Then you have the mental health issues that are going on. You're having spiking domestic violence. You have spiking child abuse. Alcohol abuse is up. Suicide hotlines numbers are up. This is what's happening when you lock down people, and then you have 36 million people who've lost their jobs, and I'll tell you that is a tragic number. So there's stuff that's going on in a major way that we need to address.
So how does this task force operate exactly?
Well, so the way it's working is I've submitted ideas, several sheets filled with ideas on what I think we should do to incentivize economic opening as well as economic activity. We've met with the president. We've had conference calls with the president and vice president, and we've had discussions with the administration. And they in turn are internalizing and processing the ideas that we have, that we're discussing, and trying to get those out to the states, and also trying to use the bully pulpit to get people to open up.
So, Congressman, do you believe it's up to the individual states to reopen and not necessarily in the purview of the federal government beyond offering the guidance? There was obviously early on in this some communication, some debate as to whether or not the federal government could reopen the economy versus the states.
Yeah, I think it's the state's obligation. I think it's in the state's constitutional purview. Where the federal government should weigh in, and I've been a big advocate of this, is if there are constitutional rights, some of these civil rights are being abused by states, tyrannical leadership in states, elected officials locally, then that's when the federal government needs to get in. But where the federal government what it can do is it could make sure that we have the necessary tax, regulatory, red tape, incentives to open up the economy and make sure that citizens of the states can engage in economic activity safely.
Congressman Andy Biggs is joining us on the line. He is on President Trump's Congressional Task Force on Reopening the American Economy, which tells you what exactly it is we're talking about. Democrats, Congressman, are pushing for a $3 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. Can you take us through the contents that justify the president saying, yeah, there's no way this is going to work. It's dead on arrival?
Yeah, first of all, you have $1 trillion going to states that's backing up everything from defunct pension systems to just wild programs, budgetary deficits that have been lingering for decades in some places that the Democrats want us to bail them out. Then the balance of the bill has very little to do with impacts from coronavirus and government shutdowns. And so you have states that have actually locked down their economies so badly, they want us to backfill their coffers. So that's on the state side. But then you also have the national mail-in ballot electoral system that they want, which is a hazard in and of itself. You start talking about, what's the one today I was looking at, like $100 million, $50 million to some small idiosyncratic environmental program. That's what this is. This is kind of a wish list of my friends on the left, what they would like to have in there. This should be a non-starter for a country that's already pushing a good $26 trillion in national debt and a $4 trillion structural deficit this year alone. You throw three more on that, and we're going to have a larger government base to the GDP, in other words, our economic production, than we will private sector production.
Yeah.
That would be the first time in American history if this bill were to pass.
It is so ridiculous. What's interesting, our Congresswoman in Seattle, Pramila Jayapal, she is the head of the Progressive Caucus. According to CNN, she's apparently complaining that the bill doesn't go far enough. She's saying it should include something called the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which would cover 100% of workers' wages up to $90,000 per year. Why do you think that idea is unworkable?
Well, because you give every incentive not to work. And that's, first of all, there's no money to it. Second of all, it's an absolute socialist program. It's antithetical to who we are as Americans. The third thing is it undermines this resiliency and self-reliance and takes away the incentive to work, which, by the way, we had a 3.5% unemployment rate, more people in the workforce than ever just 10 weeks ago, and people feeling confident in who they were. When you take away meaningful work from people, it really does hurt their mental ability to process, and it basically also hurts our economy. This is just it's wrong on so many levels. It's not even meritorious to even start a discussion on because it's so outside the realm of possibility and reality.
Well, and I honestly don't know where all this money would come from. It boggles the mind that we're now pushing this idea, the folks on the left, that we are going to guarantee you an income. You don't have to do anything. And so if a whole bunch of people aren't actually working, they're not paying the same amount of taxes. And so I can't figure out where they think this money is going to ultimately come from.
Well, they're not worried about it because we've just done $3.2 trillion roughly in the past few bills. So once you start talking $1 trillion and it rolls off your tongue with ease, and you're not concerned about how you pay it back, then you can say, okay, we want to make sure everybody gets paid. But the question is, why 90,000? Why 100,000? Why not 150,000? Why not just say everybody's going to get guaranteed pay? Because when you can't afford the lower number, you certainly can't afford the higher number, and it's not realistic. So who we're getting it from? We're going to borrow it, and it's going to be loaded upon the heads of our children and grandchildren.
So before we let you go, Congressman Biggs, I want to shift gears and talk about the allegations of unmasking. We learned yesterday a number of Obama officials, including President Obama's chief of staff, was involved in unmasking requests for General Flynn. We know that the conversation he had with the ambassador to Russia was leaked as a result of this unmasking to the media. We're not entirely sure who did this yet. And in the Senate, Lindsey Graham says they're going to convene an investigation starting in June. Just real quick, I mean, Joe Biden is out there first saying he had no idea about the investigation. Then he immediately said, "Oh no, I knew a little bit about the investigation, but that's kind of all." But now we found out he tried to unmask Flynn.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, with Joe Biden, first of all, this kind of contradiction is not surprising. It may be intentional, which would be a lie, or it may be just unintentional because he can't remember anything. So who knows? But I do know this: when you have 39 people, everybody from the ambassador to Italy and the ambassador to Turkey asking to unmask Michael Flynn, when that's about 39 times more than the usual request to unmask, you have got a serious problem, and it certainly begins to look like a conspiracy, and then somebody was leaking. That's how all those people got involved. And so this is really outrageous conduct from the highest level. And guess what? This all comes back to early January in a meeting in the White House in the Oval Office with Joe Biden and Barack Obama president.
But they didn't know anything. Remember that. I'm grateful. I'm grateful, Congressman, that you and your Republican colleagues are going to be looking into this both on the House side and also on the Senate side. Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona. He is on the Congressional Task Force of Reopening the American Economy. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.